So I'm talking about the new moon in Libra, also talking about Diwali, and answering your astrology questions. So check it out now. Okay, so here we are. We are here. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. Has some stuff going on. I didn't. I didn't tell you, but I'm running for the House. I'm going to be elected to the Congress, hopefully. It's election day here in the U.S. Can you imagine me? Me in the House or the Senate? Can you imagine? Might happen. I'm keeping my eye on the election results. It could be me. So, of course, that's not the case, but I am going to be talking about the new moon in Libra that is starting. It'll be tomorrow, as you can see the chart here. We have the chart and the new moon. We have the new moon when it comes together. Here, when sun and moon come together, they form this conjunction point, and that's the initiation of a new cycle. And so that is starting. This is a chart for November 7th at about 5 a.m., which is tomorrow morning, at least from where I am, right? So, and by the way, now that I live in San Diego, I live in conservative country. I probably would lose, but I think my representative is Democrat. So I'm apolitical. Not apolitical, but I'm definitely an independent. I certainly tend to trend more toward, inclusion, but, there's a lot of things I don't like about what you would call Democrats, but we won't get all political. But I'd probably lose. You see this long-haired hippie trying to get elected in San Diego. By the way, I'm very close to Mexico, so there's a lot of people that really want that wall built not far from where I am. So San Diego is pretty conservative for the most part, generally. Trends more conservative, but our House representative is at least, he's a Democrat. So I did vote. I voted. Okay, so let's get to it. This is a new moon, right? In Libra forecast first, I want to talk about that, and then I'll answer some questions. So, the new moon is when the sun and moon come together and that sets off a new cycle. And that new cycle is what's going to be pervasive, for the next 30 days. And we can see that the sun here is at like 21 Libra in Vishaka Nakshatra, and that is where the sun and moon are going to come together. So we're going to have this 30 days of energy that's related to Vishaka and Libra energy. So, of course, Libra it's ruled by Venus. It's very much about accommodation and, honoring another person's wishes equal to our own. Libra is really the sign where we learn to, again, compromise with others. Now, again, a lot of that, the easiest way to see that come into our life is through like a romantic relationship, and because that's the most intense expression of that sort of compromise. And because we get the most deep, I should say the deepest interaction and intense mirroring in that romantic, relationship when we become sexual and all of that. It's a much deeper energetic. But we also see the same kind of Libra, harmonizing in, for instance, business relationships, because once we invest a lot of, financial energy and value, then there's a lot of intensity. So again, you want to understand that Libra, as ruled by Venus, is anytime you're engaged with a lot on the line with another adult, It's not like a parent and a child or a student and a teacher. There's no hierarchy. It's two individuals with mutual desires. So you want to also understand that the mutual desire comes in, like this. It basically says, I can only accomplish this goal with your help. I can only achieve this heightened level of enjoyment, happiness, pleasure with you. So you and I need to do it together. And here's what I'll give, and here's what I expect. So that's really, that kind of bargain is what Libra is about, right? And again, that's why there's no hierarchy involved. It's not like a boss and an employee, because a boss can just tell the employee what to do. Children and parents, again, there's like a hierarchy. So again, in a romantic situation, obviously, it's where our pleasure, like our personal individual pleasure, gets magnified, and in the process, it gets intensified, because I can give myself pleasure, but that kind of self-pleasure is nowhere near as powerful and intense as the mutual pleasure and the compounding effect that comes when you are engaged with another person. Then pleasure becomes joy and happiness and bliss in a romantic sense. Same is true with a business partnership, where I can accomplish a certain amount on my own, but I'm only going to experience so much success on my own. When you really want your success to magnify and spiral and go and reach more and get, turn into like a business where millions of people can benefit, then you need to involve other people, and you need to get into an agreement with them, where, let's say, you give them a certain amount of money and they give you a certain amount of labor or whatever it is. Again, in both examples, there's an exchange of value. And sometimes, literally, the exchange of value is your values themselves. And so we can tend to, in fact, give over some of our values and value system to the other person, and the relationship itself becomes a separate entity. The two people actually create something together that is its own living organism to some extent. And it's a culmination or a magnification of certain shared values. And shared, it has to, be mutually agreeable. And those things can be however it looks to the two people. Like every romantic relationship is completely different. And the agreements are totally different. And depending on the two people involved, that's what, only the two people involved can legislate those agreements. By the way, I see a lot of questions coming, and as you can tell, I'm not answering your questions yet. So I'll go back, but I would ask people to just wait on the questions right now, because I'm doing this update first. Then I'll go back and look at some of the questions, okay? Because I see there's some good questions coming, but right now I'm doing this, so let me just continue. So the idea that you create something that magnifies even beyond what you can create on your own is very important with Libra energy, and the harmonizing and negotiating and navigating those agreements are what we learn in Libra. So we learn to be diplomatic, mainly because we get something out of it that we really like. How much have we learned in relationships because we know that if we want to continue to have sex and have that closeness and have that other thing with that person that we can't generate on our own, that if we want to have that, we need to chill out and shut up and not act like the monster we can be at times. This is how relationships really humble us, right? And teach us something, because we can just fly off the handle and do whatever we want. But as soon as we want to get something with the other person, we learn that if I want to get that beautiful thing, I can't do this thing. And that really teaches us. Same way again in business partnerships and whatnot. So that's going to be a big theme for the next 30 days or so starting tomorrow. And so your relationships, your negotiated agreements, the boundaries you have, the exchanges of value and money that you have with businesses, but especially not just businesses that you spend money to, but people that are in partnership with you, will be important, okay? And so in the midst of this right now, we have Venus retrograde. So Venus has gone retrograde, which is the ruler of Libra. So we've been experiencing a certain amount of recalibrating of our negotiated agreements for the last couple weeks since Venus went retrograde. There's been a recalibration of those things. And so the recalibration of those things is going to really come front and center. So a lot of this reflecting on your desires and your capacity to compromise and all that is going to be really important for the next 30 days, because we have this new moon here in Libra and the ruler Venus is retrograde. So it's going to be a lot of reflection, introspection, and ability to correct yourself and your mistakes in relationships for the next 30 days. Very powerful lesson can be learned, because when planets are retrograde, they're closer to the earth and they become much more internal and spiritualizing, right? It's very bright, close to the earth, and becomes a more internal spiritual force where we can connect more directly to that pure energy of the planet itself rather than some external form, which is what we usually seize upon. We seize upon the person, the situation, and we lose ourselves in it, and we forget what we're doing. The most important person in all of your relationships is you. Because the thing that all of your relationships have in common is you. And I'm sure that if you introspect, not even that much, you can see a common thread in all of your relationships. You go into all of them, you sort of, inflict yourself on everyone in a good and a bad way. Again, you have your strengths and your weaknesses, but the difficulties that you have in relationships are the same ones in all of them. Notice it and be honest about it. And again, the more intimately involved you are and the more is on the line, the more your negative tendencies can come out and undermine it. So this is a very, very, very important time for you in your life, because Venus doesn't go retrograde in Libra and stay in Libra for 3 months very often, but it is now. And Venus is going to be in Libra till the end of the year. And now it's the new moon in the sign that Libra rules. It's Mula Trikona sign. The sign of relationship, the sign of relating, the sign of your ability to compromise and hold your own ground first. Because we tend to compromise too much, and then the scale snaps back in the other direction with Libra. Libra is often about a lot of extremes. I'll compromise and do anything. Now I won't do anything and it's your fault that I compromise so much. So now you're terrible. You're amazing, you're terrible. These extremes that we swing on relationships have a lot to do with Libra. So notice this in all your relationships for the next 30 days. The nakshatra is Vishaka, which is ruled by the gods Indra and Agni. And it's known as the star of purpose. It's the star of inspiration. It's very much a sort of crusading energy. It's, in fact, where we take that energy of Libra, and of course, in Vedic astrology, we use the sidereal zodiac. Every astrological text, totally clear. Aries and Ashwini are aligned, even down to the harmonic charts in every Vedic astrology text. Okay? No ambiguity there whatsoever. So, Vishaka starts at 20 degrees of Libra and then goes to 3 degrees and 20 minutes of Scorpio. And so it's that section of Libra where Libra becomes Scorpio, where that individual compromise evolves and elevates towards something more social, where we look for more purpose, where we look for higher meaning, not just in general, but in our relationships themselves. They need to have a higher purpose and meaning, otherwise they fall apart. Usually something like a spiritual tradition or something like that really if we don't share the same values with a partner or the same kind of teachings, it's very hard to keep them together. And Vishaka is very much about that kind of energy, that higher purpose and the willingness to crusade and even sort of destroy the harmony in a relationship in order to be aligned with higher purpose. The gods Indra and Agni were the two big, sort of muscle men in the Vedas. Indra is the god of, he's the king of the gods, and he's also related to lightning and the Maruts and the great forces, the thunderbolts of inspiration that come and show us something beyond this earth. And Agni, of course, is the god of fire, the one who takes our blessings to God. He's the fire god himself. And in the dasha scheme, in the Vimshotri dasha scheme, Vishaka is connected to Jupiter, but you don't want to say that the nakshatras are ruled by Jupiter or ruled by planets. The planets rule signs. The nakshatras are ruled by gods and deities, like I'm saying. But their energy gets activated, and it's activated in the dashas of the planets. So the planetary energies activate them, but they're not ruled by that. The planets rule signs, and the nakshatras are ruled by deities. Okay? So it's that deity, it's that cosmic force, that spiritual force of dominion and kingship and lordship of Lord Indra, and that purification and that power to consume and illuminate and burn and edify of Agni. Because all of our oblations that we put into the fire in fire ceremonies, we're prostrating and asking Agni to take the blessings to the god, and he takes him to the sky god, which is Indra. So you want to understand this very powerful correlation in this nakshatra. It's actually one of they're all very powerful, but Agni is powerful, Indra is powerful. It's both of them together. So really, in many ways, this sort of example is like something going into the fire and then the fire taking it up to heaven. You see, when you put something in fire, it disperses into the ether, into the air, and goes up to heaven. So it's that sort of transformation and alchemy. This is really what drives Vishaka. That's why it can be quite a sort of crusading, energy, where people are really focused on higher purpose, sometimes even at the expense of their relationship, at the expense of that compromise that allows us to get along and be nice with people. Vishaka people are often like, if it doesn't have this higher purpose, then the hell with it, kind of. And again, that can break the connection of Libra, but it also elevates it because it insists on something really pure. And it insists that relationships be pure in that regard. Okay? So those are some very deep spiritualizing principles. Now, this new moon is also called Diwali, which means the festival of light. And a thing you want to understand that's very interesting is that this is the time of the year where the sun is in its debilitated sign, and the moon is very close to its debilitated place, and the moon is really dark. Okay? And of course, the next day or so, the moon is then in Scorpio in its debilitated sign. So in many ways, this day of the year, the new moon in Libra, each year, which is Diwali, is the day when the sun and the moon collectively and each one are about as weak as they can be. Because again, moon is debilitated, and then the sun is in its debilitated sign, the moon is right next to it, and the moon is very dark. So the way that you qualify the power of the moon, number one, is by its brightness. Moon is powerful when it's bright. All right? The other is by its dignity, especially when it's in Taurus, which is its sign of exaltation and Mula Trikona. So on Diwali, the moon has two severe strikes against it. One, it's extremely dark, which is difficult for the moon. It's difficult for the mind because we're emptied. And it's right next to its debilitated sign. In fact, the next day, it's usually debilitated after the new moon, maybe 2 days later. You can't always tell because it depends on when sun and moon come together. Sometimes it's earlier. But you can see, if I advance this, this is on November 7th. When I push it ahead 1 day, the moon is in Scorpio at its deepest debility the next day. So this is why on Diwali, which means the festival of light or the celebration of light. So why do we celebrate light when both lights, both luminaries are so dark? Well, because they're so dark. So if you know the story of Lord Rama, sorry, taking my hair down. Ponytail was a little tight. Okay. All right. So if you know the story of Lord Rama, does my hair look okay? The story of Rama coming back into the kingdom after being exiled. And what happens is the villagers take little clay pots and light the way. Little Deepa lamps. Lamps with the light in it. So that Lord Rama can find his way home. Now understand the symbolism here, because Lord Rama is the Vishnu avatar of the sun. Lord Rama is the avatar of the sun. And on Diwali, the sun is debilitated. And again, the sun is the light. It's the Jyoti of Jyotish. It's the light within. This, not only is the sun really debilitated, which means Ram is debilitated, but also the moon, which is his wife, Sita, is also debilitated. So what's happening is they're coming back to the kingdom after this horrible travail with Ravana and all of that. And so because they're both spent and weary, the villagers light their path home by bringing lamps out, like a clay pot with ghee, so that they can find their way home. So again, of course, the sun and the moon on a cosmic level, on a spiritual level, are related to our, consciousness. Our pure consciousness, the sun is that light of consciousness within, and the moon is a reflection of consciousness on the mind, and how the mind and manas reflects consciousness. So this is how we experience our life. Because we can't look directly at the sun, we perceive the sun, the cosmic sun, or the Paramatman, the Supreme Self, through the agency of the mind, of the heart, is a better way to look at it. The moon is the heart. This is why we feel life in our heart. We feel how this external world impacts us in our heart, usually some emotional experience, and that's trying to connect with the soul, which is the sun. So it's the heart, or the moon, which goes back and forth between the limited experiences through the body and the unlimited, non-local, universal identity of the sun. So this is how sun, moon, and earth, or sun, moon, and body are related. So on Diwali, both of these lights are weak. So we have to intentionally bring the light. Intentionally illuminate consciousness. That's what it's about. Because they're both somewhat extinguished. Sun in Libra where it's debilitated, moon very close to its state of debilitation where it's emotionally restless and volatile. So we intentionally bring the light on Diwali. So tomorrow is the day to really celebrate the return of the light and your return to your light, so to speak. Rather than losing yourself in the light, you can reclaim your connection to the light within, and through your spiritual practice and through meditation, New moons and full moons are especially good times for spiritual reflection, meditation. And on Diwali, though, it might take a little extra because because of the debilitation and the lower dignity of the two luminaries, of the sun and the moon. So, by the way, I forgot to mention, because I forget to do my commercials, but if you want to see how these would impact your sign, I just put a link there, Astrology Training Lab, only 50 cents, and I talk about how these new moons and full moons influence each of the 12 signs, because if you're Aries, it's different than if you're Taurus or if you're Cancer or Leo, because this new moon is happening in Libra, but that is unique for each of the 12 signs. So if you want to see how that applies to you, and also if you want to get a daily forecast, I do a daily forecast, and also one of my great students also gives daily forecasts, then you can check that out. Only 50 cents for the daily forecast, and to see how this will impact your sign as well. And you can cancel that with any time within a 2-week period, but then you can also stay a member for only $39.95 a month if you choose to stay after the 2-week trial. So you can check that out if you like. So I'm going to go back and look at some questions now. Up at the top, I did see people asking about their charts. I don't read people's charts. I have a this here. What can you say? I'm not going to do that. So someone asked about the intro music. That's actually from Apple, from what's it called? iMovie. It's one of the things you get in iMovie. It's in the iMovie library, right? And then the scenes are from, I just bought access to video blocks, and these are some cool video block scenes. So I just strung them together and put the iMovie music behind it. It is really nice music. It's so cool. I really like it. So I just start that, something pleasant for you all to look at, and until I show up. Okay, so trying to get. All right, sometimes this doesn't scroll so easily. So let me look over some of the questions. Okay, so here we go. Someone asked about remedies. I'm not really, it's not that simple. Remedies for Sagittarius Ascendant and Capricorn Moon. It's just too general. Okay, let me go down. Okay, so we have someone asked a pretty heavy question, Sudevi, about what happens when souls commit suicide. It's a very deep question. I try to be careful about anything that I guess you would say advise or whatever. It's said to not be very positive, because we were given life and then we took it. And in a general sense, what can happen is that we, at worst, and again, I'm not trying to lay anything heavy, but at worst, we don't fix anything, because the karma isn't finished. We just come into the next life with now the karma of having killed ourselves in the previous life. That much can be said. That much can be known. We can know that much. Okay, we can know that much. So, but besides that, what happens? What happens to the souls when the soul dies? Things happen. Lord Yama, we visit the places we're supposed to visit, right? And it's said that it's a mistake, that we're here to work through what we're here to work through, and that we can't get through certain moments. It's just tragic. And then we take our life, and then we don't end whatever it was that made us take our life. We just have to deal with it the next lifetime, with the specter of having taken our life the previous time we had to deal with it. So, there were some other questions. I saw them come. Someone said Vishaka on the ascendant, then you have Vishaka on the ascendant. So I just explained what Vishaka is, and then that's the ascendant. What about it? That's it. Yeah. So then your ascendant has those qualities. That's what it means. Can Parvartana Yoga happen in Navamsha or other divisional charts? It's a good question. And there are some who would say that because it's not an astronomical chart and other things, no. This is something that comes down to an astrologer's experience. I will tell you absolutely based on the way I work, which I work with very much with Raja Yogas, triggering the results of karmas, and very precise methods. And by the way, maybe I can pull this up right now. Oh, here it is. I got it. And I can show you a chart. Here we go. I could show you a chart, because see, I have good, I've researched the stuff I talk about, by the way. You should understand something. And again, it's not a braggadocious kind of thing, but controversial views like this and others, I can usually pull it. I have charts because I've researched all of it. None of it is just, well, I think this and some theory. And by the way, again, not to insult other astrologers, because they're great astrologers, but I've really noticed, because now there's so many astrologers and there's so many theories, everybody's got a lot of theories, and I don't ever see any examples of the theories. The stuff that I quote use, and I don't even like to say believe or think, are from my practice. It's because I usually, in fact, not usually, but I always have case studies. I don't always have them off the top of my head, but usually I do, and in this case I do. George W. Bush, I'll give you an example of Parivartana Yoga in a harmonic chart. It's the D10. By the way, you're saying Navamsha chart and other divisional charts. Absolutely, George Bush, you can see in he was elected president at the very beginning of his Saturn Dasha. So when you look in his Saturn D10 especially, you can see it right here. Look at this. It's debilitated Saturn. Oh my God, how could debilitated Saturn ever make him president? It's debilitated in the Navamsha. It's a functional malefic in the natal chart. It's the 8th lord in the natal chart. Why did Saturn Dasha make this guy president? Right? Literally, it's the 8th lord in the Rashi chart, functional malefic. In the D10 chart, it's debilitated with Ketu in the 10th. You would say this is just utterly going to destroy this person's career. If you know anything about astrology, you might think that would happen. But look at what it's doing. And by the way, debilitated planets exchanging or ruling each other or exchanging with exalted planets or whatever, this kind of thing is very powerful. So it's debilitated Saturn in a Parivartana Yoga with exalted Mars, but this debilitated Saturn also rules debilitated Jupiter. But again, this Parivartana Yoga in the D10, in the Dasamsha chart, is absolutely the most, in my opinion, if you want to talk about scientific astrology and what makes karmas ripen and what makes them happen, astrologers can always pull something out of their butt and say something. But the point is, does this translate into like every chart you look at? And I've been teaching these methods for years, that the planets in their dasha cycles, they activate, their karmas ripen in accordance to what the planets rule. What they rule. Look at what they rule through Rashi and Nakshatra, okay? And things like Parivartana Yogas are cooked into the power because what they wind up doing is giving results. And often you really see the results come, especially often when they're debilitated and other things that are very worldly, especially if it's something like a career. It can be a lot of power and passion and energy brought into that thing. And this is a perfect example. You can't tell me under any circumstances that Saturn K2 in the 10th and the D10 and someone would just predict that that's going to be good for the career. But it made him president of the United States. Well, first it made him governor of Texas. This guy never did anything in his career. He was a complete abject failure until his Saturn Dasha in his career. He had Jupiter Dasha. Oh, Jupiter is great. It's great. It's great. Yeah, right. He was a total failure in his Jupiter Dasha. Alcoholic, lost his Senate campaigns, he dropped out of the military, didn't accomplish anything, couldn't do anything. Saturn Dasha comes, he's the owner of the Texas Rangers, he's a governor of Texas, he becomes president of the United States. And look at Saturn in the D10, debilitated with K2, but in this Parivartana Yoga with Mars, right? So here's a great example of Parivartana Yoga in harmonic charts, okay? So again, there are people who, and I don't argue with them, there are people who make the case that because harmonic charts aren't astronomical, and you wind up with some weird things going on. I'll give you an example I'll just give you an example that we shouldn't really read aspects or yogas or anything from harmonic charts. Now, I'm not disputing the theory, nor am I saying this is the only way to read it. I would never do that. Look, I like to see people's research. I'll show you the research of why I say something. I don't just have an opinion or a theory. I'll show you why I say it, and usually back it up with I don't know how many case studies. Other than that, I know what works based on what I've really been able to make work consistently. So the theory is sound. It's sound theory that you shouldn't use aspects, Parivartana yogas and all that in harmonic charts. Great, I get the theory. And here's why. Because, for example, look at this D10. Sun and Venus are joined in Sagittarius, and here's Mercury all the way over here in Leo. Well, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus never get 5 signs from each other. It's an astronomical impossibility, right? So it's not an astronomical chart. The whole chart itself, this is why, and again, there's no directive given. This is how hopefully a good researcher and good scientist figures out what's going on. You have case studies and you look and then you ponder these issues. So I understand the theory that if it's not astronomical, then there shouldn't be aspects, especially aspects, because aspects are astronomical. Again, in my practice, though, I haven't seen that work. I've seen where aspects do work and trigger karmas. Okay? But definitely, this is one of the reasons why you see that harmonic charts are divisions, and they're operating in a different way. Now, people are free to disagree. But if someone's going to disagree, I'd like to see their research. Because I actually provide research of what I'm talking about. Because, by the way, it's not only that Saturn and Mars are in an exchange, they're also in a mutual aspect. Because when you get Saturn 4 houses in front of Mars, they also aspect each other, the mutual aspect. So you got some really powerful things. It's not just the Parivartana with Saturn and Mars, it's also the mutual aspect with Saturn and Mars. And it would have to be this powerful to make the man president of the United States, for God's sake. Particularly after what a horrible candidate he was, frankly, just objectively. He lost the popular vote, and he got the enormous benefit of the fact that his brother was the governor of Florida, and they frankly jerry-rigged they jerry-rigged the vote. Because ultimately, he actually lost Florida after the recount. A debilitated Supreme Court is shown with this debilitated Jupiter. The story is here. And by the way, if you're interested in actually learning this kind of stuff, I just did a course not long ago called the Swiss Army Knife course, where I taught all this kind of stuff. Parivartana yogas, things like hemming, all this kind of stuff. How to actually do it. Again, I don't teach theories. I teach methods. Everything is a method. I don't teach anything that I haven't done for years, more than a decade. So, good question, and I'm glad to answer it. And usually I can pull up a chart off the top of my head that answers it because I've researched this stuff. They're not just theories. Okay. Combustion and cazimi as 2 different phenomena. Are they essentially the same? Well, cazimi is a Western astrology concept, and I understand the idea. And well, nothing is the same thing. Combustion is when the planets get within a certain degree, a certain range. Cazimi is usually when it's totally lost in the rays, as you would say. It's totally behind the other body. Now, the thing to understand is combustion can happen. The planet can be very close to the Earth and combust. By the way, this is something I also talked about in my Swiss Army Knife courses, is about combustion and retrograde. Very powerful. But Mercury and Venus, for instance, can be combust and retrograde, right? Like, for instance, Venus now is combust and retrograde. Let's go back to the other chart we had, which was here. Okay. Venus is combust and retrograde. Oh, actually, no, it's not anymore. But last week, it was very close to the sun. Now it's out of the combustion range. But when Venus goes retrograde, it becomes combust and retrograde. At that point, it's very close to the Earth. All right? So the problems of the combustion, which are a feeling of feeling like irritated, and it's called kopa. It's a deep tadi avashta called kopa, or angry. It's like a frustration. That quality of frustration when Mercury and Venus are combust and retrograde tends to be really minimized. But the retrogradation is still there. But the problem of the combustion, which is that frustration that arises, tends to be really minimized. Now, cazimi is when the planet is on the opposite side, the other kind of retrograde, the other kind of combustion, when a planet is furthest away from the Earth, and particularly within like a couple degrees. I think the range of cazimi is like 1 degree. I think it's when it's totally obscured, within like 1 or 2 degrees or something, on the other side of the sun. So astronomically, and again, you should understand things and their astronomy. Astronomically, the planet that's just combust, which is, by the way, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, when they're combust, they're always furthest away from the Earth because they're never combust and retrograde at the same time. Okay, so it's only Mercury and Venus that do that. Every other planet, when it's combust, is as far away from the Earth as possible at that time, and it's on the other side of the sun astronomically. Now, that has a specific effect. It tends to burn and purify the nature of the planet, but that purification is often through some kind of uncomfortable, again, sort of anger, irritability, and frustration with that thing in the world. Okay, that's what combustion is in general. Okay, so when it gets really combust, and what you would call that sort of cazimi, then it is said to be like ultra energized and purified and empowered by the sun. So it's legitimate, in my opinion. But it's also, again, the problem isn't that we throw these words, it's that we can interpret them. And again, not that any astrologers can't, because I haven't really heard what other astrologers say about it, but the thing to know about any kind of combustion, because we then want to put it in a category of bad or maybe good, it's good because it's blah blah. Okay, there's a good and a bad. Okay, the good for the combustion is that the planet is behind the sun, so the sun is pushing its energy. Like the sun is the sun; it's the only one that's the sun, right? And so the energy of that planet is coming through the sun with a lot of power, and again, that purifies the nature of the energy. But again, it purifies it by creating this kind of frustration with it, and the way it feels to the person, because we're very emotional, is it feels like some frustration with that energy. Like with Mars, we're frustrated that we're not winning every battle. With Venus, we're frustrated that we're not respected and appreciated. With Mercury, we're frustrated that people don't understand us and what we're saying, etc. With Saturn, we're working hard and focusing on things, and we're frustrated that nobody else is, or that people, blah, blah, all of that. Frustrated with authority figures who don't recognize us, or whatever is going on. But the power of that can be a great purification of that energy. So what can happen is we stop looking for it externally. When we can manage the frustrating part of it and the getting angry about it and the touchy spot that is created, there's a great possibility of that purification. Okay, so that's really what happens with the combustion in general. But again, remember, Mercury and Venus are combust and retrograde when they're closer to the Earth, and all of that problem with the combustion of the frustration and all that is much less. Why? Because the planet is very close to the Earth at that time. It's not so far away from us. Again, understand how the astronomy plays into it as well. The more you understand the astronomy, the more you also understand why, and it's because that nature of, let's say, the Jupiter or the Mars or the Saturn that's combust, it's so far away from the Earth. It's like we can't really feel its pure nature so easily. It's coming through the sun, so it's getting this kind of burnt up, this sort of burnt up effect. The sun is going, kind of burning it up, saying all of your teachers and gurus were wrong and we're frustrated. That's like a combust Jupiter. Like all the people that you're trying to work with and compete with and sort of test yourself with, which is, which is Mars, they're all terrible. They're trying to hurt you, and so it turns it into this, it kind of exacerbates it, but it gives it a lot of power, a lot of force, okay? Especially like with Mercury, I've noticed people that have that sort of cazimi Mercury, they can be very good writers. Their mind can work really fast, but again, again, you have to bring in other things, especially like the dignity. It could be moving really fast and be very stimulated and active, but maybe the dignity is really low. You could get a really high Cazimi Mercury, or Mercury that's being really energized by the sun, but let's say it's in Pisces or it's in Cancer. Again, in water signs often Mercury can be quite confused. So there might be a whole lot of words coming out and a whole lot of ideas, but they're not really so accurate, which Mercury is very much about accuracy, precision. And again, look at what we do online these days. Everybody digesting so much information and not really comprehending much of it, right? So this kind of thing could be even like a very overactive Mercury that's energized by the sun, but not really integrating it very well, or just being sort of, and even being kind of maybe frustrated about it, for example. So, again, to come back to it, everything is about the interpretation and really understanding that. So that's why when I might get to less questions than other people, but the ones I choose to answer, I want to answer them thoroughly. I don't like giving some short answer. I like to explain things, positively and sort of comprehensively. So I actually talk quite a bit about this kind of thing, again, in that Swiss Army knife course. It's a lot of, in fact, all of these kinds of things that you hear about, but you never hear them interpreted or shown in chart reading. All right. Someone asked about nakshatras, for example, Vishaka consists of 2 signs. Does this always mean a person carries the potential for both sign or one or the other? No, it's just one sign. Like, for instance, I have the moon in Vishaka, and it's in Libra. So the moon is in Libra in Vishaka nakshatra. That's it. I know there's a lot of stuff being talked about with padas and all that these days. Honestly, I think a little bit of it is there's too much being said. The padas are the Navamsha. Okay, Navamsha, it's right in the text. It's pretty clear, right? And so again, a lot of things like, well, then the pada, since it's a sign, then there's the guna and the element and the this and the deity and all this to the pada. I'm not saying it's wrong to say all that. I'm not at all. But I see a lot of like, oh yeah, I've learned so much with my pada, and they're just acting like this pada of the moon or of this thing. It's like a whole other zodiac thing. They're kind of going, it can just get kind of ungrounded, okay? And again, just bring in a lot of other things. So not to comment on other people's work, because I'm sure they explain it quite well, but I've just noticed it's like we have to be careful with bringing something in that it doesn't just create another layer of complexity and even confusion when we haven't really learned how to read the chart correctly yet, and we're just seizing on like one thing. It's just very easy to just say a whole bunch of stuff and just kind of have it take you somewhere. So again, like in my case, the moon is in Vishaka and Libra, all right? It doesn't have a quality of Scorpio just because Vishaka goes into Scorpio, okay? It might have a quality of Scorpio if it's really, really close to Scorpio, like 29 degrees or something. Like mine's 25, so it's in Libra. So when planets get close to the Sandhi point of the Rashi, then they start to take on that other quality because, again, but this is also shown in classical Vedic astrology. You have what are called Baladi of Ashtas, and you start to see that the planet is either at a Bala or a very infant stage, or Mrityu or a very dead state. And Mritya and Bala tend to correlate with each other. The Mrityu Bala of one ends at the Bala of the other, and Bala empties into Mrityu. So you can see that it's like infant and old age. Infant and old age, they both have a certain uncertainty. That was good. They both have an uncertainty about them. One is kind of young and naive, and the other is kind of old and feeling kind of used up. So you want to see which end of the Sandhi, which end of the transition the planet is on. Take that sign. You have to interpret that. You realize that this is at the very end of this Sandhi point, and it's corresponding with the beginning of the next. So this is at a very late point in, let's say, a certain sign where there's a Bala Avashta. So it's very much like a sort of innocence. And it's picking up that sort of experience of the next one kind of thing. So Sandhi in general is somewhat unreliable. Again, by the way, talking about all these things, all of this was talked about, exact degrees. This is the concept of exact degrees. And exact degrees matter. And they matter when they matter. They matter in aspects. They matter when planets are moving. They matter, when one thing changes to the next, of course. That's when you really focus on exact degrees. An aspect that's to the exact degree is much more potent than one that's wider, especially if the aspect is applying or separating. And again, all of these things matter when you see them. So it's not just, so you want to know how to recognize these things, not just recognize them, but then interpret them. What does that mean when you get something at the very edge or about to move into something? What does it literally mean? How do you interpret it when it's closer and whatnot? So someone asking about their chart. Going down again a little more. Ratmakark, Jupiter. Somebody asking about their chart. It's going down. Someone says, I don't know, but we should listen to Sam. Absolutely do not listen to Sam. Ever. All right, let me scroll down since I... more actual questions. Sam, I questioned if debilitated planet is retrograde, positive effects or the negative effects magnified. This is another example of what I said. Debilitated, retrograde, it's just two things that you have to look at. Okay, positive, negative effect magnified. So it all has to be interpreted. So I kind of said a little bit of that here, that all of it needs to be interpreted, okay? And so what happens when here's the principle, okay? And it's better to understand the principle. And one of the main things that happens that confuses students is we want to put things in good and bad categories, right? What happens if an exalted planet is retrograde or debilitate or whatever it is? Debilitated is retrograde. Does it give positive effects? Or are the negative effects magnified? But the other one is, what if a debilitated planet, or what if an exalted planet is retrograde? Is it then bad? So it's because we're putting things in good, bad categories. Okay? There's a good thing and a bad thing. I've heard that a bad thing plus another bad thing makes a good thing. So is it bad and good, or good and bad, or bad, good, what, good, bad, right? So the principle is this. Let's say the planet, and again, way too much is emphasized on debilitated because, for instance, great enemy is almost as, quote, bad as debilitated, okay? But you have to interpret everything. I never say the words. When we're just kind of dallying, or sort of dabbling, rather, in astrology, we seize upon these things because, oh, that's something I can remember and I can say something good or bad. Again, it's kind of like the death of actual learning, is this kind of gross categorizing. Identify, categorize, and then kind of be confused, right? There's a reason that we would do it, but you just want to always be aware of it, okay? So debilitated and retrograde, two bad things. Does it make it worse and badder, or does the second bad thing cancel the previous bad thing? So the reason the principle is there that a planet that's that's debilitated and retrograde could be positive is because, let's say that it's difficult, where you're saying debilitated. But again, debility is not the only thing that could be difficult, and many times it's good. But let's say that that's the principle, that the bad thing is helped by another, quote, bad thing, which is retrograde. The reason this principle would exist is because if we have this difficult thing and the planet is moving forward, then we're going to move forward with that thing, right? Like, let's say that I have a like a broken leg, right? But for some reason, I'm ignorant to the fact that my broken leg means I can't run so fast. So even though I have a broken leg, I'm going to enter, I'm going to enter a marathon. And I'm going to put all my money and energy into entering the marathon, even though I have a broken leg. So in many ways, a planet that's really messed up kind of has this idea. It's like something that's not working so well. And in worst case, we don't even know it's not working so well. We think it's fine. So we just go do things and just screw it up. And in this case, we're taking something like a broken leg and saying, "Oh, it's fine. I'll just get through it somehow. I don't know. And we're acting on this thing that's weak. We're acting on something in the world based on something that's very weak. Okay? This is how a difficult thing that's maybe unconscious in our mind can be more damaging. When it's retrograde, again, retrograde means we hesitate. When something is retrograde, we hesitate with it, like I explained with Venus at the beginning. We're not sure. We're like, I'm not sure about this thing. So we hesitate and we think about it and we're like, I'm not sure what's going on. So when you get a planet that's difficult, kind of like the broken leg, it's good to hesitate and not say, "Oh, I have this broken leg, but I'm going to enter the marathon anyway." Whatever. No, we would maybe think about it and go, wait, I'm going to be entering a marathon and I have a broken leg. Maybe I should think about this a little bit, right? So with the planet and its dignity, it's the same kind of thing. When planets are moving forward, we're moving forward with them in our life. We're doing things with them. So if a planet is difficult, and there are many ways to have the planet be difficult. Okay? So astrology, you don't just have rules, but you have the principles. It's basically saying something that's weak. It's better that if there's something weak, it's better that we hesitate with it. So it might be a planet in good dignity, but it might be joined Saturn, Rahu, and in the 8th house. If we just plow through with that thing, so let's say exalted Mars. We love exalted. We have exalted Mars, but it's with, Ketu, Mercury, Venus, and they're all retrograde and combust in the 8th house. Okay, at that point, if we're just like taking that Mercury, it's exalted Mercury, I'm going with it. It's going to be a complete mess, right? So it would be better if it was retrograde. It wouldn't be because it's joined the sun in that part. It's too close to the sun. But the example is that. Something like that. And in fact, even with an exalted planet. So even an exalted planet that we might follow a lot. Or I should say that the example would be, I actually got lost in my example. Even a planet that's exalted, if it's joined a lot of other planets, that makes it difficult. That brings difficulty to that planet, we also should hesitate. That's the principle, okay? So I got my metaphor mixed up. But that's the principle. Again, so don't see so much upon, retrograde, debilitated, and like that's the only way you can apply the principle, okay? Because you have rules, but rules refer to principles. So it's basically saying something that's weak, we should hesitate on it. We should not be so comfortable and be so certain of that thing. So let's say a planet that is difficult, but it's retrograde, and it has the potential to bring us difficulty. It could be a functional malefic often. Other kinds of planets, again, you have to be careful of what you say. I see someone said a malefic, retrograde malefic in a Kendra could be good. Yeah, it could be, sure. That example was good. Through effort and consciousness. Absolutely. Understand the principle. After that, you don't have to ask me. This is the principle. So anything that seems like it might be bad, retrograde. And again, because you're understanding what retrograde is. It's introspection. It's slowing down and pondering that thing. Often, though, because we've messed it up. It's because we mess it up, but then we introspect. So the literal example of the debilitated planet, it's going to make some mistakes. But if it's retrograde, when it makes those mistakes, we're going to introspect and slow down and go, maybe I'm making a lot of mistakes here. Okay? But it's not just debilitated. It could be a functional malefic. It could be this or that. It could be anything that could bring difficulty. And again, that's just the power of the retrograde planet anyway. But here's the other thing, how retrograde can be difficult on something that's beneficial, because the other part of the rule is the exalted retrograde planet is as if it's debilitated. Again, they say these things to get you to understand the rule. But something that's really powerful that we should be acting on, let's say, that we're trying to, let's say it forms this great Raja Yoga. Let's say it's like Jupiter in the 9th house for an Aries person, right? It would be Jupiter in Sagittarius for Aries, but it's retrograde. Well, see, this Jupiter for Aries is a powerful planet. It's trying to take them and have them trust their vision and their purpose and their teachings and charge forward with them, right? So that Jupiter, it's like they're thinking, yeah, let me do that. But if it's retrograde, they're like, I'm not sure. Should I trust that? Should I do that? So this is how the retrograde can also influence and hold something back that should be positive for the person, right? And again, you also want to understand it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means the person will hesitate with it, and through the hesitation, they'll learn, but you'll see things get interrupted. So like in that example, the person might, because Aries is impulsive, they might find this teacher and then that teacher and get all excited about teachings, right? But then the retrograde will make them question and wonder and question, and maybe even question a good teacher eventually, right? Because the retrograde creates confusion. So again, I'm trying to take some isolated examples so you understand principles. I really try to have people understand principles as much as techniques. When I teach my certification courses and when I tell people about it, I let them know that this is the higher level. Everybody focuses on these little bits. First, people focus on their own chart, which is not, you're really not going to learn much. But then they focus on things they've identified. This thing, what about that thing? What about this specific thing that I've learned how to identify? Again, it's better than just the chart, but deeper than that or higher than that is the principle that's behind it. The principle behind, why there would be this rule about, it's called Nichabanga. Retrograde debilitated is one of the Nichabanga factors. What are the principles behind that? And when you start to understand the principle, then you can apply the principle to anything because the principle is universal. The application of the principle is in different forms, and you see that application, in fact, in many different situations, not just in Nichabanga. Right? In fact, you saw it even in that Parivartana Yoga that I explained with George W. Bush. Because what can happen is when you get these two things that are quite stressful and difficult, but they're interacting with each other, it magnifies the stress. It also magnifies the willingness to go through the stress and the ability to defeat someone based on the stress. But the stress is still there, right? And so, and the difficulty can get magnified. So, but also the results can get magnified. You read it in different ways because results come from yogas, but then you see the backstory and the struggle based on the exchange, right? And so, again, these are just universal principles of how energy interacts, and then you can see it in every situation. So how do you understand the natural benefic and functional malefics? Well, natural benefics are just natural, okay? I don't know if you know what natural are, but it's just a category. It's easy, right? Natural benefics are Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, the moon. Natural malefics are Mars, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, right? Functional means based on the houses they rule. And it's a formula. That's all. So that, and again, that's just identifying it. That's the first level. I've basically taught you nothing. You can get that anywhere, okay? How do you understand it? Well, you have to study. That's how you understand it. You have to learn about house rulerships, why these are malefic, and functional benefics and functional malefic. Why is Saturn the best functional benefic for Libra, Taurus, in some ways Gemini? Why is Jupiter the most cruel malefic for Taurus and Libra? Again, you can say why. I could say, and the answer would be because it rules the 3rd and 6th house. Well, that's not an answer, really. That's the data. But the answer and how can you understand it, you have to then understand what is Jupiter actually? What is Libra actually? What is the 3rd house actually? What is the 6th house actually? What's the house scheme in general? What's the zodiac in general? Right? Why do Venus and Jupiter have antagonistic relationship naturally? There's, again, so it's sort of the principle that I'm also outlining is I can give you the data point, but how do you understand it is you have to study it. There is no shortcut to that. And you have to study with a teacher who knows it. And by the way, this book is all about it. This is the book. And by the way, this is the book. I'll just shameless plug. If you want to really understand it, this is the book where I explain it. Because every planet, and you see it's called the Ascendant, 108 planets of Vedic astrology. Why does it say 108 planets? Because there are 12 ascendants and there are 9 planets, and each planet is completely different for each ascendant. Jupiter is a totally different planet. It's almost not even the same planet for Aries as it is for Cancer. For Aries, it's the 9th and 12th lord. For Cancer, it's the 6th and 9th lord. Well, actually, it's a 9th lord for both. But for Libra, it's the 3rd and 6th lord. Totally different energy. For Leo, it's the 5th and 8th lord. For Virgo, it's the 4th and 7th lord. For Aquarius, it's the 2nd and 11th lord. All of this is completely different. It's almost not the same energy. So Jupiter for a Leo person feels totally different than it does for Gemini. And understanding that doesn't just help you understand Jupiter, it helps you understand Leo and Gemini. And how each sign, again, this is why I said you got to understand all these holistic ideas. Understanding that is just the first part in understanding the holistic zodiac, which means Gemini is not just one sign. It's that point in space, in the zodiac, in relation to every other one. So Gemini is the place where the moon rules the 2nd house. It's the only place where the moon rules 2nd house. And Sun rules 3rd house. And Mercury rules 1st and 4th. And Venus rules 5th and 12th. And Mars rules 6th and 11th, etc. It's the only place it happens. So every sign is a composite of each planet as a house ruler. So again, this level of complexity is just really not shown by almost anyone else except my students, by the way. And whether you think that's good or not is up to you, but that's what I break down in the book. And what happens is when you approach the zodiac from that deep, holistic point first, that's the entry point into the chart. When that's your entry point into the chart, again, then what you think a sign is or what a planet is already about 10 times deeper than the next person, because you don't just see it as these segregated energies. Jupiter is not just Jupiter. It's, depending on the ascendant, on the rising sign, it's a whole different energy, completely different actually. So by the time you do that, then once you start looking at aspects and yogas and all this other stuff like debilitations and all these things that everybody's focusing on the surface, because again, when I hear a lot of the questions, it's all very surface because there's so much, there's like this iceberg underneath that's like, you'll never learn how to do this really well if you don't address that, if you don't learn that structure really well. And you don't have to learn the complexity of the house rulerships and all like I'm explaining, but be pretty good to do it. So the short answer to the natural and functional benefics and malefics is they have a natural status, which we all know. Venus, Mercury, Moon, Jupiter are the benefics. And by the way, Mercury is a benefic. It's a Soumya Graha. It's a gentle planet. And Sun, Mars, Saturn, and the nodes are the natural malefics. And then for each ascendant, based on the houses that the planets rule, they're functional benefics or functional malefics. Okay? Okay, so that's about enough for me. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. It's pretty good for me. All right, just piece of skin on my finger here, sorry. But so anyway, I hope you're having a good one, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation and some good questions. And I hope I answered some of your questions. And have a good and happy Diwali, Return of the Light. May the light return in your life, and you have